So, at the core of the APA's Code of Ethics, we've got these 5 general principles. And they're aspirational, right? They're not like a checklist we follow step by step, but more like guiding ideas. Things like beneficence, responsibility, integrity, justice, and respect for people's dignity. They create the foundation for all the decisions we make as professionals in psychology.
Exactly. And those principles, they're what set the stage. But here's where it gets practical. The ethical standards take those ideals and translate them into actionable guidance, right? So it's not just be ethical. It's more like, here's how you actually stay ethical in real-life scenarios, especially when things get messy or ambiguous.
Messy. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It reminds me of a situation I ran into a few years back with one of my students. She was struggling emotionally, like really having a hard time. And I had this responsibility to keep her confidentiality, but at the same time I'm sitting there wondering, am I causing harm by staying quiet if she needs more help than I can give?
That's a tough spot to be in. How did you handle it?
Well, honestly, I leaned pretty heavily on the 5th principle, respect for people's rights and dignity. It was about balancing her autonomy and privacy with getting her the support she might need. So, I went back to the ethical standards, dug into everything around confidentiality and when exceptions are okay. In the end, I consulted a school psychologist. They helped me figure out how to connect her with extra resources without overstepping. It wasn't easy, it was delicate, and it took a lot of thought. But those ethical guidelines were like a roadmap through a pretty confusing situation.
Those principles and standards, they're not static. They're designed to help us ask the right questions and figure out what's the most ethical decision for these circumstances, for the person in front of me in this exact moment.
That's such a key point, adapting ethical principles to the moment and the person you're with. It actually reminds me how often cultural competence comes into play. Understanding things like intersectionality and systemic inequalities. It really impacts trust, the kind of trust we work so hard to build with the people we're trying to support.
Absolutely. The APA and ACA lay it out plainly. It's not just about awareness anymore. It's about tailoring how we approach interventions and advocacy to fit a client-specific socio-cultural context. Without that, we risk overlooking their actual needs or accidentally reinforcing barriers.
Exactly. I think advocacy isn't just one big action. It's these micro decisions that add up. It takes a lot of reflection, too. I've found myself, even after a case like that, going back and asking, what could I have done better?
And that reflection is what keeps us growing. Cultural competence is a continuous, evolving process. It's about staying open to learning, even when it's uncomfortable. In my work at the Department of Health and Human Services, we emphasize this. We train staff to avoid assumptions and encourage them to ask clarifying questions, even when they feel awkward. It's about trust building, plain and simple.
That's a really great point. I think sometimes we're too afraid of making mistakes, so we avoid engaging at all. But avoiding discomfort doesn't really help anyone.
I think this is where we need to challenge ourselves. How are we making space to learn about and honor the experiences of others? How are we committing to ethical advocacy in every part of what we do?
And I think that's the big takeaway here. Whether it's cultural competence, advocacy, or just reflecting on our own practice, it's all about staying engaged. The more we lean into that process, the better equipped we are to serve with integrity. And I think that's a good place to wrap up.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks so much, everyone, for staying until the end of this overview. We hope this course on ethics be a springboard to effectively applying ethical principles in whatever field you pursue. Have a great term, and remember to proactively communicate with your professor and faculty advisor.